Hello everybody and welcome to Free Spirit TV Information Beyond Mainstream. Today I'm very happy to once again talk to Ole Dammegard because he has a very interesting and personal story he would like to share with us right after the commercial.
Hier noch eine Nachricht in eigener Sache. Free Spirit TV ist eines von mehreren Projekten des Free Spirit Bewusstseinstrainings. Dieses Training ist ein hervorragendes Konzept für Menschen, die einfach mehr vom Leben wollen. Wenn du dich nach etwas sehnst, sei es, dass du noch glücklicher sein möchtest oder reicher, gesünder oder nach einer tollen Beziehung, wenn du dich beruflich auf deine Vision konzentrieren und noch so einiges anderes verwirklichen möchtest, dann empfehlen wir dir von ganzem Herzen das Free Spirit Bewusstseinstraining. Du findest es unter www.freespiritinfo.com. Ah ja, und noch etwas. Da immer mehr alternative Kanäle im Internet unterdrückt werden, wissen wir nicht, wie lange wir dort noch senden können. Für den Fall, dass die uns das Licht abdrehen, sei vorbereitet und abonniere daher unbedingt unseren Newsletter auf freespirit-tv.ch. Danke und schön, dass es dich gibt.
Ole, welcome again.
Thank you so much.
You have found out something very interesting about your parents actually. What was that?
For many years I've been feeling, I've questioned why I've come to this part on my life, why I've come onto this path, and why I seem to have this ability to see stuff that other people have not. And over the years, one of the things that I know is that my family had this, we had a perfect surface. We were officially the perfect family, but there was a whole lot of other stuff going on under the surface. So I felt that over the years when I was a kid, I became very good at feeling when I was being manipulated or lied to and so on. So I thought that was it. But then over the last 5-6 years, when I've looked into more and more false flag operations, which has led me into the research of Gladio, and I don't know if your viewers know about Gladio.
Yeah, please explain what that
Okay,
is.
Gladio is a NATO creation. It was NATO was created right after the Second World War, an alliance of different nations that were going together in the beginning of the Cold War, because these big superpowers were so powerful that all of these tiny small little countries like Switzerland, Denmark, Sweden, all of them were so vulnerable, so they created this NATO alliance. And someone, I don't know who, came up with the idea, because of this threat of a possible invasion from the east, that why don't we create a super secret, ultra secret ghost army in all the different NATO countries, make it mandatory. Any nation that wants to join will have to create this. And this ghost army will consist of hundreds of small little cells of 6 to 8 or 10 people, military people like with a military background or into police or security, these type of things, people with knowledge of weapons. The groups were totally separate. They were so that no one knew the whole picture except the people at the top. That's standard procedure as well in these type of operations. And they would be fully equipped with weapons, fuel, money, mines, bombs, radio equipment, you name it. Fuel also, if I didn't mention that. All of it buried. So that hundreds and hundreds of small cells that did not know of each other but was still a network that could not be infiltrated due to the thing that they were totally separate, would be sleeping, and nobody would know about it, except if the country would be invaded. And if so, then the leading people of the government and the royalties or whoever could then leave the country, go to London, where the whole thing would be set up from, and then more or less with one phone call activate the whole army in one go, boom, fully equipped, in location, ready to fight. So if you ask me, that is a brilliant defense strategy. And Denmark was one of the founding nations of NATO and also had their own Gladio ultra-secret army. Every single country had their own name for this. So in Sweden being neutral, should not be there at all, The Gladio network in Sweden was called Stay Behind. In Denmark, Absalon. The Gladio name comes from Italy, where that was the name of it, and that has become the sort of the general name for this whole setup. So over the years, when the Cold War started to get less cold and the threat from the East started to be less of a threat, somebody came up with the idea, here we have thousands and thousands of disciplined warriors that no one knows about, fully equipped, ready to follow orders to do whatever we tell them to. Why don't we use them for something? And at that time also the CIA came up with what is called the strategy of tension, which is how to affect a population to accept more and more control, more and more surveillance, what we're seeing today. How do you do that? Once again, back to fear. How do you create fear? Random violence. Why random? Because then it can affect anyone. It needs to be random. And in on stage came terrorism, the way we see it today. Terrorism that was, I mean, the masters of terrorism are Mossad, or the ones that created it. It's even, the motto of Mossad is war by deception. War by deception. You don't even know there is a war, but there is.
Yeah.
Okay, so Gladio, from being a super incredible defense mechanism, was then turned into becoming a terror tool in the mid-60s. And this is where we see, from then on, there are all of these different alleged terror groups like Baader-Meinhof, the Red Brigade, you have the Brabant gang in Belgium that went around shooting in supermarkets. You had the train bombings in Bologna, you had all of these things. Gladio, 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 Gladio. And this whole thing was so secret up until 1990, where there was a big, big scandal that erupted in Italy. And it turned out that there was more than 10,000 people in Italy involved in Gladio, all the way up to the top of the top of the top of the government. So this scandal from Italy started spreading from NATO country to NATO country to NATO country to NATO country. And then they said, well, now you know about us, so we promise we're not going to do anything bad in the future. Absolute bullshit once again. Of course, they just regrouped and carried on. It's still active to this very day. And now there's also variations called Gladio B. I mean, how creative to come up with a name like that. Anyway, so this whole thing happened. And over the years, when I looked into false flags, I become more and more understanding and get a better knowledge of how this worked. And the more I learned about it, the more similarities I found with my father's background and my family's background. And I'll be like, that's a bit peculiar, isn't it? It happened there, and in our family. And these groups, and in our family, and this, and in our family. And so I started looking into more and more about my dad's background, because I only have this very cute fairy tale, fluffy version of my childhood, where I was born in Denmark in a family that was very much involved in the resistance movement in Denmark against the Nazi occupation. And so my dad was high up in the resistance movement in Copenhagen. My granddad, on my mother's side, was put in jail for helping Jews escape to Sweden. He was there for 3 months. And there's about 10 years, I'm more and more understanding that from 45 to 55, no one knows what my dad was up to. It's like I had this version. My dad was in the resistance movement, and then afterwards he worked for the military. He was doing air surveillance, where he was the one driving around in Denmark, finding out where they would put up towers for identifying attacking planes. Tower, yes, we have an incoming like that. Okay, Denmark is as hilly as this, so it would take like not 10 years to find there's a hill over there, let's put a tower there, and there's a hill 50 kilometers that way, let's put another tower there. That's it, thank you and goodbye. What was he doing? And then the story I've been told is that he was living in 1955 behind a gas station in a bus together with his dog. That sounds to me like a bit of a loser, because he was in his, he was 40 or something like that. Mm-hmm. Not like, yay, successful.
Not so much, no.
And then he met my mother, and he was then, what he told us was that there was two guys working this gas station, and they managed to get the sales up from 200,000 liters to 1 million liter in 1 year. And my dad said, I was running around every day, I was washing the windows, and we were just doing like this, boom. So Esso, which is Standard Oil, which is Rockefeller, American, they were in Denmark, and they headhunted him. So his job from living in a bus, suddenly he was what is called distriktschef, the chief of a district in half of Copenhagen. That is quite impressive, to come from 0 to, boom, a chief executive post in a major oil company like this. And at the same time, also this was in the late 50s, living in a bus with a dog, and suddenly he had a Chevrolet Bel Air 57, brand new American massive car, one of the few in Denmark. He said to us it was only him and the king who had one of these. So loser, dog, bus, where did that? It's like having a brand new Ferrari now. Yeah. It's the same sort of, okay, but we've just seen photos, and wasn't it cute, and yes, it was fantastic, and so on. And then we were living in a villa. I've never heard where this villa came from, how it was paid for, who it was bought from. Nothing. They did not live together before. Suddenly they were living in this villa where I was born and, in that area and grew up. It was like 1 kilometer from the airport in Copenhagen, Kastrup Airport, okay? So over the years, I've sort of been, it's a bit strange. And then when I was in the mid-60s, 66, my dad called, we're back to the fluffy story again. My dad called home and said that he was very pissed off with his bosses in Esso, and he said they can just go to hell. And so my mother said, well, you got several of your partners that have died in their early 50s. I don't want to go and water the flowers on your grave. So I would put together your resignation. You can just sign it when you come home, which is what he did. And then gave it in and so on. But when I think about that, that is so not, he was having a super job. He was having a super income, and my mom was very weak type of thing. She was not somebody that would stand up against my dad, former military guy. He was, we had at home, you got like dictatorship and democracy. We had democracyship. We could do whatever we wanted as long as we did as he said.
Okay.
And there was never physical violence, but there was this iron fist that was just controlling everything. So my mom standing up against that, I think not. Anyway, what my father's job was to take care of more than half of Copenhagen's gas stations. Okay, and these gas stations were franchises, where his job was to drive around, make sure everything was okay, and that they were doing good, whatever they needed. He was super popular, and also he was receiving a lot of people from abroad, taking them to nightclubs and entertaining them and so on. And I've been like, the more I've been thinking about it is that because I was a kid and I came around, my dad when he was driving around to all of these gas stations, so I remember some of them, and the people I remember were all from the resistance movement.
Okay.
So I've been like, okay, he was also this guy and this. And I grew up with weapons everywhere. And Denmark, there are no weapons. There are no weapons. But the people we visited, there were weapons. And I thought that was natural, but then, and also I was really into guns when I was young. I wanted to become a gunsmith. I was really into the Wild West. As geeky as I am with these things, you talk to me about gunslingers and all that. This mind is like a database, boom. But so there was these weird things about this whole network of gas stations. And the more I started to see and understand is, I think that this network of gas stations was part of Gladio. Because in a crisis situation, one of the things you need to control is fuel.
Yeah.
Without fuel, you're stuck.
Right.
So the whole network of gas stations and people trustworthy that had been tested in the resistance movement were here. And so I've been thinking, like, how did they even? He was always treating them like friends, but they were never friends. But he was, they were, and he had this air about him that people were almost standing like this in attention around him, loving but in attention. And I for sure grew up in attention. You know, my childhood was like, I call it boot camp. So the question over the years have been like, it's a bit. There are all of these people, and all of them in the resistance movement. And when I grew up, there was especially one place we went to visit. One of them were a former owner of a gas station, and he had moved in on a farm. Once again, Denmark, there are no weapons in Denmark. And this guy had this farm, they shared the farm, and there was this big barn. And in the barn, they had built up a whole, you know, with hay bales. They had built up like a building inside the barn, but you could go into it. There was an opening, you could go into it, and it was a shooting range. Because you could stand and shoot that nobody could hear anything out there.
I see.
And since I was really into guns, I loved it. I mean, we were shooting all kinds of automatic weapons and you name, I loved it. And I did not see that there was anything strange with it. And also it was so open, you know, like I remember inside the house, you open the wardrobe, there was a Bren gun. Do you know what a Bren gun is? One of these.
Oh my God.
I mean, this is not something you just take in your handbag and walk home with. It's like, whoa. And all kinds of weapons and hand grenades and you name it. So that was a bit strange. And then when I was about 17, I think, one of my father's best friends, his name was Peter Bain, he used to come and visit my dad every single year. They'd come up to Sweden and they were getting drunk and talking about old memories. But he was also, in his house, there were also these weapons. And when I was about 17, my dad and I went down there and I was offered a machine gun. And now when I think, at that time, I thought, yeah, bring it on. And it went so far that my dad put it in under the seat of the passenger's seat, you know, and we were going to drive to Sweden the next day. And then he woke up and said, no, it's too risky, I don't want to do it. Now when I think about it, who on earth would offer a 17-year-old a machine gun? It's like,
it's crazy, huh?
It's bizarre. I think it's bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. And when we were kids, also in my dad's office, I was only like 3-4 years old, but I still remember the guns. We found 3 big pistols. It was a Colt from 1911, automatic 45. There was an FN Browning, and there was a little Italian Beretta. And one of the guns my dad brought with him to Sweden, so he had it all of these years loaded. So
interesting.
Anyway, so there was a strange things like this. So when in the mid '66, like I told you, my dad came home, was very frustrated, and resigned, and then we left Denmark overnight. I mean, I had an hour or so to say bye to my school friends. My brother didn't even have the possibility to say goodbye to anyone, and we left. Woof. My dad stayed, and the guy that drove us to Sweden, up to a farm that we had bought the year before, was one of the people from former owner, or he was still an owner of one of the gas stations and part of the resistance movement in Denmark. He drove us up there. Okay, so, and I can't remember, we moved up there, it was in the summer, but we moved up to a house with no insulation. It was from the 1700s. There was no toilet, there was no water, there was no nothing, and heavy winters in Sweden. I mean, it can go down 25 below. Yeah. No insulation, no nothing like that. And then, because my mother liked the nature of Sweden, let's move, boom. This is what I grew up with. I believe the story, you know. Well, about 8 or 9 months ago, I've started more and more to think that it's strange.
You started thinking about it,
yeah,
or did something happen?
I've also said in interviews, you know, it's almost like I suspect that my dad might have been part of the Danish Gladio. I think he was a good guy. I really think that he was a good guy. And it's important also, the change was in mid-60s, after the Kennedy assassination, when the CIA went totally wild. That's also when they started doing all of these things with Gladio, because we're looking at a cooperation with the CIA, NATO, Mossad, the whole setup around there. Maybe not Mossad at that early stage, but a little further on. So about 8 months ago, I had a dream. My dad died in '92. I was the only one there with him. He died, he was naked in a hospital bed, and he had a ring on, that was it. And that ring was very dear to him. And I had this dream when my dad came to me and he said to me, the key is in the ring. The key is in the ring. That's the only thing I remember. So I woke up, the key is in the ring. The key is in the ring. I was like, what? The key is in, I don't get it. And that was the only thing I inherited after my dad, was that ring. So I went to have a look at it, and it's a silver ring with a turquoise, no, not turquoise, it's an amethyst, violet amethyst, and it's an US Air Force ring. My dad did not have any American friends. And he had that ring on for so many, I've found so many photos going back, the ring is there. How the hell did a Danish citizen get a US Air Force ring? That is a good question. Yes. I asked him once and he said, a friend of mine gave it to me. But he did not have any American friends. He did not. That I know. That I know of, at least. So I've started looking into more and more of this, and the more I become aware of the more I start going back into memory. I've been speaking to my brother and sister, and they're like, they're not as interested as I am, but our whole life is being turned around if this is true, because then... of course. So...
Were you able to talk to your mother? Is she still alive?
No, she died in 2013. Okay. So also I've got a close friend of mine, Cody Snodgrass. He's a CIA whistleblower that I helped step forward. And he knows so much. He has more than 20 years of experience with Black Ops. So that is his life. So it's amazing to be able to play ping pong with him, you know, ding, 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 ding. Anyway, so what I was looking at when I look back and the stories we've been told, it's like, what? And one of them was that my dad had a bodyguard. He used to say that, my bodyguard. Okay. And it was not during the war. Why would my dad have a bodyguard? And then also, what I've got is a few photos after the Second World War where he's driving around in an American Jeep in an Air Force jacket that looks a lot like the Royal Air Force or the American pilots. It's not a Danish one. He's driving around finding these towers, which you could have done that in a week. He was spending, and I've checked out the organization, and the organization, his name is not mentioned anywhere, and it ended in '53. So there's all of these years where he said that was what he did, where that is not the only thing he did, that is for sure. So a while ago also, I saw a documentary, a Danish woman, her name is Pia Grøn, and She has made a documentary that is called Stay Behind, My Granddad's Secret War. And she has a very, very similar experience, but she is one generation younger, where her dad, my age, has suspected that his dad was involved in this, that he was employed by the CIA, all of these things, during many years. So, and that granddad is still alive. Okay, so in the documentary, it's a really beautiful documentary because they don't want him to do him any harm, the granddad. They just want to find out. So there's this loving exchange of where they're like, but come on, granddad, didn't you really like this? And he's sitting there, no, I really cannot remember. It must have slipped my mind. And it's so obvious. And her granddad and grandmother, both of them are in. You can see it very clearly. They're looking at each other like...
But nobody remembers anything.
No, that I cannot remember. But what they were finding out was that her whole childhood, the way the people they went to see, the friends that came and visited, the neighbors where they lived, where they went on holiday, all of them were connected to Stay Behind. You know, the whole Gladio network, where they went and were swimming in the summers. Well, it just happened that all of the farms right there were bought up by people from the resistance movement. So suddenly, it was not just holiday homes, and there was this, what they suspected to be an airstrip, because you had to have all of these weapons delivered that could then be spread out into these different cells. And so her father is a geologist, so they took all of these samples out of the ground where they thought, and where the local population were talking about that there was this airstrip, and they found that they had filled it up with things that would make it possible to land big airplanes, but out on a field, camouflaged, so you couldn't see it, but you could see it from Google Maps, and so because the difference in the vegetation and so on. And they took the samples and got it confirmed. And so she's in this documentary, they look up old neighbors, and one of the things also, they were at one point there was the house market was just impossible. The prices were like this, and no houses were available. And then suddenly, her father got this villa for nothing right next to the neighbor, the best friend of their granddad, but not officially. Her grandfather, in this documentary, he in 1952, we're back in these years between 45, 52, that is when the whole thing escalated, big time. Because also, what I'm starting to find out now is that Denmark, the east coast of Denmark, was more or less the front line against Russia, because Sweden was neutral and Finland was under the control of Russia. So suddenly you have the east coast of Denmark going down into the Iron Curtain, going down between Poland, Germany, separating the whole thing. So Denmark was not just a tiny little innocent country, it was part of the big game. And my dad seemed to have been quite in the center of the whole thing. So we're back to the documentary. So her granddad wanted to become a dentist. So in 1952, he went to the US to get an education as a dentist, as you do.
Normally.
Okay. So he went there, but instead of becoming a dentist, well, he became a dentist, but instead of getting the education, he ended up like as an elevator operator. You won one of the ones with the hat, pressing the buttons.
Something
in New
different.
York. Yeah, okay. It's only one little curious thing is that he was in the same building and using the same elevator as Allen Dulles, the chief of the CIA, and his brother, John Foster Dulles, who was the foreign minister. And these two guys are involved in all of this horrific thing that we're talking about, including the JFK assassination. They are key people in the JFK assassination, the whole takeover and the whole crap. He was the operator in the elevator, going up, driving them up and down and up. Or being a person that nobody would notice that could easily move around between different floors, doing whatever. And then he returned to Denmark with 1955 Chevrolet Cabriolet, brand new. Okay, so you go there to get an education as a dentist, you get a lousy job, and you come home with a brand new Ferrari type of thing. He still has this. This is a baby blue Chevrolet Cabriolet. Okay. It's the same time when my dad suddenly had a Chevrolet Bel Air 1957 brand new. Okay, so I was, you know, this divine synchronicity, I don't know how it works, but it's amazing.
Yes.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So I was sitting with some of my friends in Copenhagen. She's a little older than I am. And I was just mentioning this. And she said, oh, isn't that interesting? Because that almost sounds like my dad. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, he was working this military installation. My dad was there. He was, and also from the documentary, he was also in that military. It's very close to the German border between Denmark and Germany. They were there when the war broke out and afterwards. And my dad, just as an example, he was on a motorbike when the Germans came. He was the one that was sent down to see how far they had advanced. And he came and met the German tanks, even so that he came over a hill very fast. The tanks were there and he was like, whoa, and skidded around the first tank, went back and managed to survive. They shot at him there. He was, his shoulder strap was shot off and stuff. But before that happened, there was this small little group of Danish soldiers. I mean, sweet Denmark is a joke when it comes to these things, with a cannon against the German army, really. But anyway, so my dad had stopped there before he drove down and was talking to the guys. They were smoking a cigarette. I mean, they were nervous and so on. And my dad was cold, so one of the guys said, here, take my scarf. And my dad said, I'm going to bring it back to you. And he said, no, don't worry, I'm not going to need it anymore. He drove back, boom, half an hour later, all of these soldiers were killed. The tank just drove straight across the cannon, killed them all and so on. And my friends, it's going to be a little complicated, I'm sorry, but there are four people similar to my dad, which I suspect all of them knew each other because there's such similarities. Anyway, my friend's dad, he has ever since that day arranged what they call a light ceremony for more than 40 years, 45 years, for the victims, these 4 soldiers that were killed, that my dad said bye-bye, took the scarf and, okay, right next to this installation. And when she was talking about her dad, she had no idea. And she was just like, well, I said, is there anything you remember from your childhood? Was there anything strange? No, nothing, except I had to change school. Okay. So what was strange with that? Well, she said, I never really understood because the school was really good. And then suddenly they built a new school up on top of a hill. Hills are not normal in Denmark, on top of a hill. So it was hard for her to get there on her bicycle every day. So I said, hills are always interesting because you can have things under hills, tunnel-wise and so on. And so I said, by any chance, were there any tunnels? And she said, it's how interesting that you should say that. I was just down on a bus tour. We went down to this town or the city, you know, and there was this guide who took us around where I used to live. And then he said, yeah, and then we have this tunnel that we just discovered. And it's amazing. I was like, what? Well, there's this tunnel that just goes straight into she drew a map. I said, that is it. That is Gladio. So I said, but did your dad have anything to do with the school? Yeah, he had this little office. So what was he doing? No, because she said, yeah, he quit the military as a major. My dad was a lieutenant. And it seems like they come to that level and then they go into these type of underground things, because if they become like a general and so on, they're too high profile, I believe. Okay. So it's at that point. And she said, no, he was so cute. He cared so much about us children that he preferred to stay home and give up his military career. Okay. So I said, but what did he do when you were at school? No, he came there as well. So where was the office? Well, it was in the school. I said, but where exactly? No, it was a little strange, she said, because it was like where we parked the bicycles. There was little stairs going down, so you had to force your way behind the bicycle, this little stair, and a little door that was always locked going into the basement. And so we have a tunnel and a hill and his office locked. I was like, I can bet you that we're talking about some kind of underground installation where this whole thing, because the tunnel went straight into the military installation, that establishment where my dad, her dad, his, the granddad from all of them had been there. So, the more we spoke, then she said, well, there's this photo that he really cared about. Okay, I said, what photo is that? Well, it's him in the uniform with someone else. I said, but he cared about it. Can I have a look? Okay, so she said, yeah, I've got it in here. So she brought it. I tell you, I almost fell out of the chair. Do you know who he's standing next to? He's standing in full army, the whole thing, including a bush on the helmet. Next to him, it's two people in one photo. It's not a group photo. Two people standing next to each other, looking at what looks like some operation. Dwight Eisenhower, the President of the United States, is standing next to her dad, President Dwight Eisenhower. I was like, do you know who this is? Oh, I don't know, but he was no wonder. So I said, have you got any, like, what was he doing in the US? She said, no, he was like, he went in 1952 to the US to get an education as a driver's instructor.
It's absurd. Okay.
No, but this is once again, it sounds good, but like what? No, but it was like military vehicles. That's why he went there. Okay, so why would a Danish soldier go to the US if there's no connection to become a driver's instructor? Also, all of these jobs, my dad, his job, and also the dentist, and there's one more, kept moving. It was jobs where they were all the time driving around. They came home during the weekend and then they were gone. Nobody really knows where they were doing. I think stay behind. So I said, have you got any kind of letters or papers of what he was? Yeah, I've got a whole, when he died, I got this whole folder with, and so I said, could I have a look? Yeah, for sure. So we started looking through, and there's this letter where he writes back to his wife from Fort Benning in the US. I don't know if you know what Fort Benning is.
I've heard about it, but what it is?
That is special ops. It's the school of assassins. It is as advanced as you get in Black Ops, in the whole shebang. Massive place. That's where he was educated as a driver's instructor, together with Dwight Eisenhower. And right after the Second World War, Montgomery, the commander, the British commander, came to that installation in Denmark where all three of them were. I mean, here we have Eisenhower and Lemnitzer, which was another high level involved in JFK, the assassination of him, the Vietnam War. All of them are, and many of the military coups were also there at the same time. I mean, these are high level players. And then we have my dad, who we don't know where he was. So I thought I could say things like, fucking hell would be one of them, because it's like, what? So I started looking at, where did we go? Where did we live? Where did that villa come from? So I've been at the villa. Where is it? It is the closest villa to the airport in Denmark. Airport villa, that is it. And one place where you can easily dig tunnels would be in Denmark. It's like chalk, white dirt, there's no rocks, no nothing, and the whole airport. So when my dad went to work, where did he go? And there's another big military installation right across around the corner, plus what is called the military radio intelligence is just a kilometer down the road from where we lived. And I was also like, he had all of these foreign clients that were coming that he went to nightclubs with and took care of and so on. Gas stations? Would Japanese people or whatever they were be interested? Yeah, we're going to come to Copenhagen and see your gas stations? That doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't.
Gladio makes a whole lot more sense. And there was especially one hotel in Copenhagen where my dad used to go, according to my brother. And I think that hotel's name is Absalon, which is the name of Gladio, the Danish Gladio as well.
Yeah.
So we're starting to get weird things going on here. Do you agree?
Crazy, yeah.
So I managed to get hold of my father's best friend, who is the guy who offered me the machine gun. And she is now in her mid-60s, something like that. And I said, I've never met her. I managed to find her through social media. Are you her daughter, his daughter? She said, yes, I am. And so we started talking. So I said, are you sitting down? I don't want to shock you, but I've got maybe things that could involve your father as well. So my question number one, by any chance, did he have a big American car in the late 50s? How strange that you ask. Yes, he had a Studebaker, which was like a supercar. And so I said, where did he get that from? Well, it was so peculiar because my mother inherited this money from a relative that she didn't know about. So they bought this car and then they drove to Italy. My parents drove to Italy and then they were in Norway. My parents drove to Norway several times. And the grandfather from the documentary went to Norway as well, where the U-2 spy plane was in a flying hangar. You know. Okay, so we're looking at strange things here.
Yeah.
So the more I look into these things, I like there's one thing that has always I was wondering, because in my brother's room there was this ugly desk, not very fancy, just an ugly desk, and sprayed on the side were Thule Air Force Base, Greenland. Okay. Thule American Air Force Base, Greenland. And the more I looked into the Cold War, Greenland is like this massive ice. It should be called Iceland, not Greenland. They should swap these names.
Yeah.
It is mostly ice. Then you all the way up here is the Thule Air Force Base. And Thule is also a very weird name. You got the Thule Gesellschaft under the occult division under Hitler and Goering.
Right. Yeah.
You also have Thule, which was the insurance company that Olof Palme, the Swedish Prime Minister, created, that later turned into the headquarters of Stay Behind in Sweden. But they changed the name from Thule to Skandia, but you can still on the door today it says Thule. Okay, so we have this strange thing with that name. So how on earth did and that was the biggest spy station in the Cold War, because there they could see if the Russian missiles there were free sight, there was nothing up. There's nothing except these few buildings, an airstrip, and a massive big spy station with all these satellite things to this very day. So how does this ugly old desk end up in my brother's room? I find that strange. Because if it had been an antique or something like that was worth $1 million, maybe somebody would get it down there, transport it. But this was an ugly, really, just ugly. So the more I've started looking into the spy thing of the whole thing, was that my dad was one time on an oil tanker, an Esso, Standard Oil, Rockefeller, oil tanker. It was called MS Aarhus. And he was, sometimes when we were talking about sailing or something, he was like, wow, the waves. And I remember when I was on I also remember seeing photos of, waves. But I've never heard where he went. I don't know why he was on it. I've asked my brother and sister, they have no idea. So where did he go? Is it possible that he was being sent up to that one on the oil tanker? Because an oil tanker is massive, and if somebody says, anybody wants this desk, well, I don't know, I can take it, because you can just throw it on board and that's it, boom, bring it home, it's a souvenir. And, you know, because these guys thought it was interesting and exciting and stuff. That's my interpretation. How the hell would that desk get there anyway, in another way? So another thing that I looked upon was like, when we went down to this farm where the shooting range was inside the barn, that one is just like 3 kilometers from, do you know the White Cliffs of Dover, these white cliffs in the southern England? They're very symbolic. We have similar things in Denmark because it's built on the same, it's called Stevnsklint. And there's this church that is actually hanging out on the outside because everything is, so they stabilized it and it's sort of like a tourist attraction. And we used to go in these areas and we went swimming and we went to there, and sometimes my dad just took off to get a newspaper or whatever. So I've been looking at, if we look at the strategic position, also where our villa is and where the airport is now, is exactly where the bridge to Sweden is, because it's the closest.
Yeah.
Meaning, strategically, this is a very important point, because whoever controls, if there's a narrow sound like this, like the Persian Gulf or whatever, the one that controls, or Gibraltar, that is in power, you know. So very strategic there. Where did the villa come from? And so that was interesting there. And so I started looking into these other ones. And then my friend, she said, well, I was asking about this whole thing. And she said, well, just a few years ago, they opened this Cold War museum. I said, where? Exactly where you used to go. I said, what museum? I've never seen that. No, it's underground, 80 meters underground. It's a massive big NATO base with all the equipment, all of it, right underneath where we used to run around. Oh, playing this and that, and where's Dad? Well, I don't know, he went to buy something. So in 1970, the boss of my dad in the Danish resistance movement, I hope I don't make it too complicated, they wanted to have a reunion because all of them were getting old. That was in 1970, and I have the magazine that they gave only for their own members. So that was not meant to be spread around at all. It's just that I was into weapons and that, so I kept it. And in it, it says that my dad's commander, he was called Skipper, under him were 2 people, my dad and his best friend, Peter Mann, the guy that gave me the machine, wanted to give me the machine gun. And so in 1970, they went to Skipper's villa, which they called the Adventure Villa. That was located right on the edge of this cliff, you know. And they arranged the whole thing about that. So I've been tracking down where the hell was this villa. And it turns out that villa was right on top of this NATO super base from, when was it created? Between 1952 and 54. Exactly when these guys, I believe, my dad as well, I strongly believe, were sent over there to get education. Some of them, like my dad, I think was being sent back, and through the supervision of his skipper, the commander, was part of creating this underground base right there, right on the front line towards Russia. So where we used to live, and then this. Okay, then in the early 60s, my dad was driving around, official story, I don't know if it's true, and he almost died in his car because he was poisoned by carbon monoxide. And he said it was so unlucky because that very day, the warning system didn't let out the alarm. And I'm like, warning system for carbon monoxide? Who drives around with a warning system against carbon monoxide? No one that I know of. Why would he do that if he was not under some kind of... And then I started looking into the death of his colleagues. Do you remember I said there was 3 or 4 of them that died around the age of 50. And at the same time, my dad was taken, because of this poisoning, into a mental institution. Once again, I'm like, what? It's very strange. So And then in 1965, my dad and my mom found this farm in Sweden. We rented a house from a guy that I always remember was wearing a uniform, a Swedish guy. And this guy, my dad asked him one day, we would love to live up here, have you got maybe a farm or something? And he had, if I remember right, about 20. Is that normal? Is that possibly part of a network? I think it could be a network we're looking at here. Also because him being part of the military, I remember his uniform and so on. So that was 1965. Then 1966, my dad, suddenly there's this conflict. And I believe that conflict was when Stay Behind or Gladio turned from a defense tool where the good guys were backing it to a terror tool where suddenly they were ordered to attack the local population. And I think my dad said, absolutely no way. I think his colleagues said that as well, but they knew too much and suddenly they died. Okay. I think that's why my dad had a bodyguard. I think that's why he had this warning thing, because he knew I am in deep. And I think there's a possibility. When I spoke to Cody Snodgrass, the CIA whistleblower, Black Op, he said also sometimes you have to dishonor yourself so that like he, for instance, allowed himself to be put in jail for a couple of years. I got another contact in the CIA who did the exact same thing so that they could not stand up and give evidence against anyone because it would be incriminating the background. Nobody would take them serious because they were criminals. Is it possible that my dad maneuvered his way out of this situation by accepting to be put away on a mental institution just for a few months that would discredit his authority or credibility if he said something? I don't get it. Why from a poisoning? But if he was almost killed, he would have been in a situation where I'm ready to negotiate. I'll do that, you know. So we came and visited him there. I remember he was making like a bird, a crane, you know, the crane with and then the code names of the other people in this were bird names as well. So I'm wondering if possibly my dad's code name was the crane. I don't know, but he was not into birds, and he put a lot of effort into that one. Anyway, so in 1966, we go very fast. We moved to Sweden. And then the local newspaper came out a month later. I'm now going through these things, reading in a totally different way. And in it, my dad says, we had planned to escape for 5 years. He says, escape from the big city. But the words are escape. And then he said, I approached this guy in the uniform in Sweden, and I said, you need to help us create a new life. My dad's words. You have to help us create. And also my wife and I had planned to escape for 5 years. My wife also. So anyway, so we start from zero. My dad says bye-bye to a pension like this. They try to bribe him with a super villa in Hörsholm, which is like this to... If you compare to starting from scratch in the middle of the forest. My dad was a city person. He hated the forest. He hated the Swedes. He hated all of it. But because my mom loved the trees and the birds and whatever, so he gave up everything. But what Cody, Black Op CIA, what he says, when he looks upon this quick of us, he said, that is protection of family. Get them out of the way. And then he stayed behind, literally, and negotiated. He managed to get out alive. But I think that what he did was just like, you know, when somebody messes up and they be in the government and they become appointed the ambassador of Burma or something like that. It's a nice title, but they get sent out of the way. And here I think that my dad was degraded and said, okay, we'll let you live. We will mess you up so that you cannot testify against us. If you do, we will kill you. That's why my dad had a loaded pistol all of these years. And you will be put in charge of a network in the middle of Sweden, together with Sweden, this network. So we move over there, and the person that helps us out there, part of the resistance movement, then just 6 months or so after we moved there, it's in the middle of nowhere, 1 kilometer to the nearest neighbor. So very shortly, my dad started having coffee with one of our neighbors, and then they decided to sell to a member of the Danish resistance movement. At that time, there were no Danes at all. And then the person who helped us to Sweden, he bought the next farm. So suddenly you had these 3 farms like this, and a 4th one as well, all of them connected to the same. And according to Cody, that is standard when you have safe houses where you need to move people fast in between and so on. And then my dad had what I thought was a midlife crisis. We were living in the middle of nowhere, I tell you, but on the highest point in that whole area, which would be good for radio communication and so on. And like 1 kilometer to the nearest neighbor. And then he decided, not being interested in sports whatsoever, I'm going to build a tennis court. So he built a tennis court with bulldozers and diggers, and he never played. My mother never played. We never played. I was the only one playing football on it. But he was there, with the white lines and everything. Beautiful.
For what?
What the hell was that? So the more I've been looking into Gladio with everything buried, I was like, is that possibly one of these places? So a few months ago, I went on tour in Scandinavia, and my tour manager, I said, are you up for what could be an adventure? He said, always. So I said, have you got a metal detector by any chance? He said, nope, but I'll get you one. So we drove there, and we went to my old childhood home. And I mean, he said, when we were driving there, he said, now I know what you mean in the middle of nowhere, because this is ridiculous. It just goes on, and gravel roads and gravel roads and gravel roads. No one. And then a tennis court. Anyway, we come to my childhood home, and now it's changed a lot. So where there used to be forest, it's cut down. And where it used to be lawns and beauty, and the tennis court, gone. It's the wood everywhere. But I knew where it used to be. So I spoke to the new owner. I said, hey, I lied. I dropped something many years ago there. Is it okay if I just go and see? He said, go away, do whatever you want. So we went down there, and it was really hard to see where it used to be. But since I knew that there was like a little slope down, and then it was totally flat, even though there were all of these trees and bushes, I filmed the whole thing, and high grass, and so I was lying around on the all four, like, we're on it now. We're on it now. And I knew there was a rock there, and so here, somewhere here is the corner. So we went around with this one, nothing. And I said, I'm not sure if it works or not. So, and there was this red button, we didn't know, should we press it or not? So he said, I'm gonna go and bring some coins and the manual so we can see. So, and while he was walking away, I went to where I found the edge of where it used to be. It's like, I don't know how long a tennis court is, but like 15, 20 meters, something like that. And when I came to that, beep, 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 like 1.5 meter times 20. And then at the corner, 1.5 meter times 9 meters or something like that. Beep, 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 beep. I said, my childhood is different than I thought.
Yeah, I would say so too. That's crazy.
So this is what I'm in the process of finding out more and more about. And the reason why I think it's important is not so much for my family, that's one thing. But I'm into a network that is much bigger, much bigger. And also, the owner that we bought this from, with the 20 farms, he's dead now, but his son still owns the land around it, because we bought this part really cheap, super cheap, just like this other person bought. Suddenly this house just appeared for nothing. My dad bought it for like 2,000 euros, 3 acres with 2 buildings and a barn. It's nothing.
Wow.
So, and when I was looking around, when I found this beep, since there was a whole area where the trees were cut down, I looked to the side and I saw there was this like stub, part of 1.5 meter, 130 or something like that, cut off. And I thought, that's perfect, because now I know where the edge is. And there was a second tree further down, looked very strange, like cut off, where it started. And I thought, great, now I can I can find it next time. Then when I got back home, I thought, maybe this is not just for me to find. Maybe this is, they have marked it, because they don't have control over the plot anymore. The whole, whatever it is on their land, somebody else's, but in a crisis situation, boom, boom.
Yeah.
So I think it's still active. And people have said, what, didn't you start digging? if that's explosives from like the 80s or 90s. The granddad in the documentary, it seems like he was paid by the CIA up until the late 80s. So I'm like, I mean, just to connect CIA with my dad to start with, it's like, it's bizarre.
It is, yeah.
But when you look at it, there's so many similarities. And is it possible that he was as well?
Very strange. I think it's interesting because you're doing this kind of research and now you're finding out that your dad might be...
And I feel it's almost like he's guiding me. You know, my daughter is psychic, and she says that granddad is really proud of you, and he's just smiling all the time. And I don't know. I have no idea. But then Cody, the CIA whistleblower, he asked me, describe your mother. So I said, why? He said, describe your mother. Well, I said, she was really beautiful. She looked like Raquel Welch. Really beautiful, multilingual. She spoke 5 different languages. She did shorthand, she was translator. And in this article, it said that she was a German correspondent. She was a beauty optician. She was doing beauty work in Denmark. What was that? That was what they said 1 month after they came to Sweden. So Cody said, good looking, honey, that's called honey trap, multilingual, that's all of these different trades. When he asked about, he kept asking, he said both of them. He said, you can be assured they were both spooks. I was like, my mother. And then he said, what about your granddad? Because her father, they were not in a good relationship, these two. And I think he was very much involved in this whole thing. I haven't even gone into that area, but he was very deeply involved in it. And I think that he more or less gave his daughter to the network against her will, more or less. Because also my parents were married in 1955, not romantic whatsoever. They just went to an office, boom, signed it, very close to the villa that was then came out of nowhere. And they never wore wedding rings. Even though they were married in the 50s, that is standard.
That's strange, yeah.
And also, I spoke to both my brother and sister, and I said, have you ever seen them being intimate? Have you ever seen them hug? Nope. So Cody said, both of them.
That's one of a story. That's crazy.
I know.
So you're still doing research, I believe,
yeah,
right?
and I'm like, and now I'm going on tour here soon. I'm going to Denmark in a week. And then on the 1st of May, we're going to do the whole of Scandinavia, And one of the places I'm going to go is to the villa, and also to this underground Cold War museum, and see if I can find the villa where I am sure, I tell you, I can almost bet that my dad were in the US 52 as the other ones, and came back and was part of creating these underground bases, which was, it was the Cold War. Everybody was so fearful of the Russians. So he was a patriot. And I believe when in the mid 60s, when this whole thing turned around, he said, no way. And after that, he was under control. It was like Cody said, he was compromised. They had him by the balls. There was something that kept him, so,
well, lucky he got out somehow.
Yeah, but he was not happy. He died quite miserable. His career was like this, and then it went straight down.
Yeah.
But I've always seen him as a grumpy, angry, and also a bit anxious person. You know, like there was one time where when my brother was on a moped, and my dad was, "You have to call me as soon as you get there. Call me." And when my brother was like, "What's up with the old dude? I mean, come on, let me go. I'm 15." But I think that there's been different situations where we have been under threat.
Yeah.
Because I know that he was walking around with a loaded gun, and I think I have no idea what was going on. We also had a summer child from East Berlin that nobody knows what was doing there, and so all of these weird details. I've only scratched on the surface.
Yeah.
But
Well, thanks for sharing, anyways, and I wish you good luck finding out even more about your family. What really
but
happened.
also I tell you, what I'm part of exposing is this Gladio network that is still active. This is also why I have to step a little carefully, because it's still there.
Yeah. Yeah. Might be quite dangerous, right?
It is. I know the woman who made the documentary, one day when she came out, somebody had put fuel in her window cleaner thing on the window. These are type of things, you know, we see you, watch out.
Yeah, you watch out and please stay safe.
Who knows?
Well, Ole, thank you so much for sharing this story with us.
I'll be back and tell you more, maybe in a year or so.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you. Dear viewers, thank you for watching and being with us. If you would like to support Ole, you can get in contact with him on www.lightonconspiracies.com. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Much love from Switzerland.